The Seattle Kraken are searching for consistency. They got off to a pretty good start, but now have dropped 3 straight. Erica Ayala of Locked On Kraken is here to talk about that and what it'll take to get the team back on the right track next on today's Locked On NHL Podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show a familiar face and voice for Locked On NHL fans, Erica L. Ayala. And Erica, great to talk a little Kraken with you for a change. And pretty good start to the season, and now they've dropped 3 straight. What's been the biggest difference over the last few games?
Well, I think first what we can start with is that Vince Dunn, one of our defensemen, is on LTIR. And we were on our Thursday episode for Locked On Kraken last week with Zane Begg. And we talked about that production drops when Vince Dunn is not in the lineup. At least those are what the numbers that we saw last year. And it would stand to reason that that is a part of what's happening. I think you can also chalk it up to, as we heard Jared McCann say after the most recent loss to the Hurricanes, and Joey Daccord also re-emphasizing this, who he was in net for that game, that this is a team that's very much still trying to get seamlessly integrated into new systems under a new head coach, and not a complete overhaul of a coaching staff, but definitely changes. Now, while Dan Bylsma knows the organization because he was the head coach for the Coachella Valley Firebirds, our AHL team, for the last 2 years, and the year prior to that, when we were, as I like to say, co-parenting with the Florida Panthers and the Charlotte Checkers, he was on that staff as well. There wasn't a head coaching position, so he was an assistant coach there. So there is continuity, but that continuity has existed within the pipeline, not necessarily with this full roster.
Talk to me about, you mentioned Jared McCann. He and Jordan Eberle just off to great starts so far this year.
Well, and that's another thing that I've been talking about on the podcast. Jordan Eberle named our second ever captain, a captaincy I've been calling for quite a long time. Dan Bylsma wasted no time announcing Eberle as captain. And Eberle told us after that first game, an afternoon game Pacific time against the St. Louis Blues, that he is a lead by example guy. And, whether he would admit to it or not, Gil, you have to think that knowing that this is a role that he is stepping into, that he has been anointed, so to speak, the captain, that I think you're seeing in his game that he's taking his role very seriously. And it's not that he hadn't before. Eberle has always been a stalwart as far as I'm concerned. I know you, of course, know what Eberle can do, and some of his best scoring years, of course, with the Islanders, I think that that's what we're seeing is him, practicing what he preaches. He's a lead by example guy, and he's going out and getting this offense started. What I would add as an alternative way of thinking about it is that he is with Jared McCann, and at least in the most recent games, with Matty Beniers. Now, this is a combination that has worked in the past. Of course, Dan Bylsma going to play around with the lines. He also has said overwhelmingly he's not going to be committed, to and have things set in stone to where they're not able to move around as necessary. But what we have seen is that has been a line that's been effective. So I think what we're seeing with, as you mentioned, McCann, who's been our leading scorer the last 2 seasons, alongside Eberle, and Beniers, who had a 2-goal game the other night, that's just a really good combo right now.
Talk to me about Beniers, the progress he's making. We're all waiting to see him develop into the player he was expected to be. Sounds like he is making some progress.
Indeed. And it's very related to what I was saying about Eberle and, of course, McCann. That trio, they have always worked well together when we've seen them in the past. I think that their games suit each other very well. And so you have someone like Jared McCann, who you might consider more of a finesse player. I mean, that's within the context of the Seattle Kraken, but he also has had to learn because he's played center for us when our lineups due to injury have been a little bit skewed. And so what you're seeing is a really balanced effort, and there is a level of comfort. So the players, they kind of can anticipate where each other are going to be. And why I like that for Matty Beniers is because he's learning to be a little bit more of that alongside, again, Jordan Eberle, who I think just taking on that leadership role has really stepped up his game. And now Matty Beniers is an alternate captain. And then you have, again, he's learning alongside and able to facilitate alongside Jared McCann. And, I think Matty Beniers came in with, there was a lot of pressure. You don't perform after winning Rookie of the Year and everyone's writing articles about you in a season where the team's not doing well. There's a little bit of pressure off, more of the conversation, of course, about the coaching staff changes, even Shane Wright. And there's not as much pressure for Matty B. He's come in focused, and we're starting to see that pay off on the score sheet, although I think that his game has translated off the hop for the Seattle Kraken this year.
Talk to me about scoring depth. We don't see a lot of it right now. Top line producing, where are the other goals going to come from?
And what's interesting about the Seattle Kraken is that we actually saw them revert, and I do mean in a good way, to the fourth line early in this season being one of the more productive lines. And so we're looking at times where Ty Cartier, Yanni Gourde, and Brandon Tanev were starting games for the Seattle Kraken and able to activate pretty early on in the season. Now, as I said, that top line indisputably is the Beniers line. But we haven't seen, and it's something we talked about on the podcast recently, we haven't seen Andre Burakovsky, who is healthy. So that's not the reason. He is healthy this year, but we haven't found a groove for him yet. He's bounced around a lot. Oliver Bjorkstrand, another player who I think has been and will continue to be great for the Seattle Kraken. Haven't quite found the right fit for him. And that goes in lockstep with Eeli Tolvanen. And so there is a little bit of shifting of the lines, the chemistry, not exactly, in my estimation, where the Seattle Kraken wants it. So I think that we're going to have to see a little bit more. I know we're getting a little deeper into the season and early into the season, but I do think that we'll see a few more changes with the lines as opposed to having them set because we're not getting production from, quite honestly, scorers like Burakovsky, Bjorkstrand, and I didn't even mention Chandler Stevenson yet, but we're not seeing the consistency that we know can be a part of their game. So I think it's back to the drawing board when it comes to, again, outside of that Beniers line and to some extent the Yanni Gourde line, have to just switch some things around.
Special teams have also been an issue lately. What's going on with the power play and the penalty kill?
Well, I think one thing goes to the first thing I mentioned, Gil, is that Vince Dunn not being a part of the fray right now, that is an impact. He is definitely one of our offensive defensemen, very integral on the power play. Now, Eeli Tolvanen, not a defenseman, but someone that we have seen on that power play unit in particular. But again, that's a little bit of experimentation. What I like, at least what we're seeing on the power play, and we've noticed this early on, and we maybe have reverted back to habits that are a little more familiar, but the Seattle Kraken are being much more aggressive, going north-south as well as east-west, using the complete surface of the ice to their advantage, as opposed to kind of having set positions, almost like a zone, if you think about it that way. And so, again, that is an adjustment. It comes with the new coaching staff. There are some personnel changes that are happening, some because of the circumstance with Vince Dunn, others just to give people opportunity. So I think the Seattle Kraken will settle in, but absolutely it's something, especially given how special teams operated last year, that you hope is something that clicks sooner rather than later.
All right, Erica, I know you'll have your finger on the pulse of the Kraken all year long. Why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Well, you can start by heading over to this very podcast on every other Friday, including this week, Locked On Kraken, where we, of course, do our women's hockey spotlight, and every day, Monday through Friday, at Locked On Kraken, which, just like Locked On NHL, can be found on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow the show at Locked On Kraken, most active on either directly on YouTube, also have Instagram, and I still call it Twitter, so we'll go with that.
All right, Erica, thanks so much. Looking forward to seeing you again on Friday.
Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League.